In this video, I am going to discuss about international trade. International trade is the exchange of goods and services between countries. This can be in the form of imports and exports. Import is where bringing goods and services into a country from another country. Export is where sending goods or services from one country to another. Companies engage in international trade to expand their customer base and increase their sales by selling their products or services in different markets around the world. They also engage in international trade to source raw materials and other inputs at a lower cost, which can help them increase profits. International trade can take many forms, such as exporting, where a company ships its products to customers in another country, or importing, where a company brings in products from other countries to sell in its domestic market. Not only the products but all the services can be imported and exported. Companies can also engage in international trade through licensing, franchising and joint ventures. We already know the McDonald's. Almost all the countries in the world have McDonald's outlets in their countries. This is through the franchising method. The main company in the USA given the license to open up shops in another countries. This is also a form of international trade. Let's talk about the reasons for international trade. Access to new markets. By trading with other countries, businesses can access to new customers and increase their sales. Cost advantage. Companies can source raw materials, labor and other inputs at a lower cost in other countries, which can help them to increase profits. Natural resources. Some countries have natural resources that other countries don't have, so that countries can export their natural resources to the other countries, which can be fossil fuels, water, agricultural products, or even the precious metals. Specialization, unique products or patents. Countries can specialize in producing certain goods or services and trade with other countries to obtain the goods or services they need. A very good example is for that the Taiwan, because Taiwan is specialized in manufacturing microchips. So the other countries have to buy microchips from Taiwan. Patents can also play a major role. Economic growth. International trade can help to create jobs and increase economic growth by increasing demand for goods and services, because they produce large number of products at a time. So the overall cost will be distributed among large number of outputs, so that the unit cost of each product will be lesser. Diplomatic ties. International trade can help to build and maintain diplomatic and political relations between countries. Reduce dependency on domestic market. International trade allows companies to diversify their customer base and not rely on just one market. Now let's talk about absolute advantage and comparative advantage. When it comes to international trade, these two concepts are very important. Absolute advantage in international trade refers to a country or a company's ability to produce a good or service at a lower cost or with higher quality than its competitors. An example of absolute advantage would be a country with abundant natural resources like oil and timber that can produce these goods at a lower cost than other countries who have to import these goods and pay for them. In the real world, we can consider the fossil fuel. Middle Eastern countries have the absolute advantage of fossil fuels than other countries, so that they can produce fossil fuels at a lower cost and export them into other countries. On the other hand, Middle Eastern countries have less timber for their needs, so they have to import timber for countries which have the absolute advantage of timber. Now let's talk about the comparative advantage. Comparative advantage refers to a country or a company's ability to produce a good or service at a lower opportunity cost than its competitors. For example, a country that has an abundance of land and labor may be able to produce agricultural goods at a lower opportunity cost than a country that has a shortage of land and labor. This means that the country with the abundance of land and labor has the comparative advantage in producing agricultural goods, even if it is not the most efficient producer of those goods in the world. As an example, in the real world, we can consider Singapore because they have a very little land for agriculture. So comparing to the other countries, Singapore has the comparative disadvantage when it comes to land. So it will be much better to import agricultural goods into Singapore rather than producing their own needs within the country with the limited land. Comparative advantages were always comparing the situations of the organizations or between countries and choose the most cost-effective way. Now let's talk about balance of payments. The balance of payments is a record of a country's transactions with the rest of the world over a specific period of time, usually a year. The balance of payment has two main components, the current account and the capital account. The balance of payments basically means the record of international trade of a specific country over a specific period of time. There are imports and exports, which means the money is going out of the country and money is coming to the country. Recording of all these transactions is called the balance of payments. Current account. The current account measures the value of a country's exports and imports of goods and services, as well as any income flows and transfers. A country has a current account surplus if the value of its exports is greater than a country has a current account surplus if the value of its exports is greater than the value of its imports, and a current account deficit if the value of its imports is greater than the value of its exports. This is basically means if the income is higher than the expense, it is a surplus. Income will be the exports, expense will be the imports. If the exports are higher than the imports, that will be a surplus. If the exports are lower than the imports, it will be a deficit. Exports of goods and services. These are incomes. Imports of goods and services. These are expenses. Income received from abroad, such as interest and dividends. Income paid to foreigners, such as interest and dividends. These final two can happen when a country has invested in another country or a foreign country invested in our country. We all consider these under current account. Now let's talk about capital account. The capital account measures the value of a country's transactions in financial assets such as stocks, bonds and loans. A country has a capital account surplus if it is receiving more money from foreign investors than it is investing abroad, and a capital account deficit if it is investing more money abroad than it is receiving from foreign investors. This is also a consideration of incoming and outgoing. Incoming will be the foreigners are investing in our country. Outgoing will be the we are investing in another country. So a surplus to happen, the money receiving should be higher than the money investing by us in another countries. If a deficit to happen, investing money abroad will be higher than the receiving from foreign investors. Here are the examples we consider under capital account. foreign investment in the country, such as foreign companies buying shares in domestic companies. Domestic investment abroad, such as domestic companies buying shares in foreign companies. Governments use different methods to control the balance of payments of the country. This can be divided into two types: demand side policies and supply side policies. This means the government is controlling the imports. They are limiting the imports using the exchange rate policies, fiscal policies, and monetary policies. This is the other type of control governments use to control the balance of payments, supply side policies. This aims to affect the supply of domestic goods and services. This is where the government is encouraging the domestic producers and service providers to increase their supplies so that the imports will be not necessary. This can be done through tariffs and quotas, subsidies, infrastructure. Tariffs and quotas will limit the imports so that the domestic suppliers can be protected from the import goods and services. This is a way of incentivizing the domestic producers by the government. Building the infrastructure of the country will encourage the domestic producers because this will increase the efficiencies of their businesses, such as reliable water and electricity supply. Maintaining proper roads for the transportation. Now let's talk about the advantages of international trade. Increased economic growth. International trade is one of the main factors that impact the economy to grow. Look at the Silicon Valley in the USA. Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, these companies are selling their products and services to almost all the countries in the world, which caused the USA economy to grow rapidly in the last few decades. Likewise, countries can benefit from the international trade. Greater variety of goods and services. We can import goods and services which are not available in the domestic markets. This is an advantage. Access to new markets. Because of the international trade, countries and organizations can access to new markets all around the world, increasing their sales and profits. This will also contribute economies to grow. Job creation. International trade has created thousands of jobs. Procurements, logistics, transportation, ships, airlines, harbors, and many more jobs. Improved living standards. Because of the international trades, countries now can grow their economy rapidly so that the living standards of these countries will be increased. Cultural exchange. International trade is one of the main ways to exchange different cultures. Look at the social media. Let's talk about the disadvantages of international trade. Loss of domestic jobs. Because of the international trade, inefficient industries in the domestic market will be phased out because of the international trade. Widening income inequality. Because of the international trade, wealthy countries can exploit the developing countries in the world. This will increase the gap between income distribution. Environmental degradation. Because of the logistics, environment can be damaged hugely. Exploitation of labor. As I said earlier, wealthier countries can exploit the developing countries by establishing their manufacturing facilities in developing countries so that they can get access to cheap labor. Dependence on foreign markets. Because of the cheap imports, domestic producers will be discouraged so that they will no longer produce products for the domestic market. This will expose the countries to depend on solely on imports. Cultural homogenization. Look at the social media. Because of the social media, now the whole world is one culture. Now let's talk about protectionism instruments. Protectionist instruments are policies or measures that governments use to protect domestic industries and companies from foreign competition. These policies are designed to limit the import of foreign goods or services and to promote the production and sales of domestic goods or services. So basically protectionism instruments are tools that the governments are using to limit the imports so that the domestic industries and companies will be protected. Here are the examples of protectionism instruments. Tariffs. This is a form of tax. Tax placed on imports goods, making them more expensive and less attractive to consumers. Quotas. Limits on the quantity of a specific good that can be imported into a country. Subsidies. Financial assistance provided by the government to domestic industries, making it easier for them to compete with foreign companies. Embargoes. Prohibitions on trade with specific countries or on specific goods. Non-tariff barriers, regulations, standards and other technical requirements that make it difficult or expensive for foreign goods to enter the domestic market. Currency manipulation. Governments can devalue their currency to make their exports cheaper and imports more expensive. Local content requirements. Rules that mandate that a certain percentage of a product must be produced domestically in order for it to be sold in the particular market. Dumping laws. Laws that prohibit foreign companies from selling goods at prices below their cost of production in order to gain market share. Now let's recap today's video. We discussed about international trade. International trade is imports and exports of goods and services between countries. Then we discussed about absolute and comparative advantages. Then we talked about protectionism instruments. These are the policies or rules governments use to protect the local suppliers. And we also talked about the balance of payments. This is the records of a country for a specific period of time about the income and expense of the international trade. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.